Words are about to be spoken here on the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy, presented to you exclusively by Podcast Heat and at freeshows.com. I, of course, am John Alba. He is the broken one, the woken one, the spoken one himself, the purveyor of assortments of beverages and just about every other moniker you can come up with in wrestling. He's Matt Hardy. Matt, what's going on, my brother? How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Hanging out here in Boston. I only have agua is all that I have today.
Only agua.
Yes, only agua.
You are in Boston, Massachusetts, correct?
I am in Boston, Mass. Yes, that is correct.
Boston, it's a city we've taped a few times from already this year. We've had you there. You like going to Boston? I've got a lot of sentiment towards Boston. I spent a lot of time in New England.
I enjoy Boston. I like coming to Boston too because there's a direct from Raleigh, so that makes my job a lot easier. Whenever there's a direct flight to a city, that's a turn on. What
are your thoughts on Boston accents, the New England accent?
They're interesting, you know. For sure. They're cute, you know. I'm fine with that. I love the fact that there are different pockets in America where people speak differently. I think that's so unique that just everything is kind of personalized to that area. So I'm cool with it. I dig it. I like accents.
Hearing the different myriad of accents as you go up from New York up to Maine is truly incredible, because you get people like your wife who have that thick Queens accent, the Kim Ortons of the world, if you will.
Right.
Hearing how they talk, slowly moving up through Connecticut into Massachusetts, you get the pack the car, and then you get up to New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and yes, sir, bub, and you can barely understand a word they're saying. It's truly incredible, and I think that's one of the great things about our country, isn't it, Matt?
I think so. I love the fact that it's different. You know, I dig the Midwest accents. I like the way that people are laid back on the West Coast. The people in New York are maniacs. New York Minute. You know, it just very interesting. Everything Southern Mosey down in the South. You know, it's all good, man. I dig it all.
New York, they are the Wolfgang Hardys of the United States. Nonstop chaos. All the time. Kiddos, well, everyone doing all right this week?
Everybody's good. And it's funny, you even say chaos, and I address Wolfie as such. After he was born, one of the first nicknames, and Jeremy Borash, JB, actually came up with this. He said, what if we call Wolfie the great grandfather of chaos? You know, you just talk about his soul is old and his essence, and he nailed it. He couldn't have been more correct. Wolfie is Wolfgang Xander is the great grandfather of chaos.
They are all, and I know Barty's been showing his stuff lately too as well. So
he's hitting those terrible threes.
Yes, very much so. Good luck with that. I don't have any advice to offer you on that. So best wishes. But we had a good time last week. Always love chatting with you in person, getting to lay down these episodes. And we talked about MVP, and there were a lot of great stories that we got out of that. Any feedback you got on that episode? I know he reached out to you afterwards.
Yeah, he dug it, and I think everyone really enjoyed it. They listened into it, and it was really fun because I've never talked about it in that depth. And there's a lot of the really funny classic stories that I got to go into in detail. And it was a really enjoyable episode from my perspective, and I hope the people out there enjoyed it, and they seem to from the feedback we got.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. You can check it out if you haven't already. ExtremeHardy.com. One of my favorite messages that we always get, guaranteed every week, we get some sort of a tweet or Instagram message, whatever. It's like, hey, I'm just starting to listen to the podcast now. Yes. Where should I start? How can I catch up? That's the best part about all this for me.
And I've read a lot of social media message where people say that they're now binging and they're trying to get caught up to modern day episodes. So that's very cool that now people are starting to discover us and go back and binge right from the beginning.
We'll take it whenever we can. ExtremeHardy.com. And this week is a very, very special episode. We are talking the life and times of Eddie Guerrero, one of your good buddies in the wrestling world, who unfortunately left us far, far too soon. But much like our Owen Hart episode, I think this is going to truly be a tribute to Latino Heat, one of the greatest to ever step foot in the ring. You looking forward to this one here, Matt?
I am, yeah, very much so.
We got a couple orders of business that I want to cover real quick before we get into our episode here. That, of course, first reminding you, WrestleCade. Matt Hardy and I are coming to you in real life Thanksgiving weekend, the Sunday at WrestleCade. a celebration of Omega. It's going to be a big time cast of characters there. What can fans look forward to with our live Omega panel?
The live Omega panel is going to be a lot of fun. And I thought someone else was going to reach out to everyone, but I think I'm going to have to do that. I just actually got a text from Caprice Coleman, Ice, last night. And Caprice said, "Hey, man, like, I know you guys are doing that Omega panel. I would love to be there if you're cool, have me on." I was like, "Dude, you're supposed to be invited. Somebody else was supposed to be handling all this. But now I'm going to take the bull by the horns, and I'm just going to text everyone. I'm going to make sure everyone's there." So, yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk about our very beginnings, our origins when we were first starting back in the day. And there's so many amazing stories. Caprice is one guy that has an amazing story. The first time we met him, and we were just starting to run a wrestling school, and his story there with his dad is one of the sweetest stories you'll ever hear, but it's so great. And so proud of him. He's came so far, and he looks like $1 million, especially being a little older.
That seems typical. You always had to be the organizer of the Hardy Boys. You had to make sure everyone was taken care of accommodation-wise. So I guess you'll just have to do it again.
Matt is the architect.
Matt is, in fact, the architect, and he'll be the architect of this Omega panel. WrestleCade.com. Go get your tickets. WrestleCade is one of the best conventions in wrestling every single year, and it's in Hardy country, which makes it just a little bit more special. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Going to be a great weekend. I'm going to be there. Matt's going to be there. It's going to be a ton of fun. Go check that out. I do want to throw a couple plugs out here, Matt, if you don't mind, because this week I launched a couple things that I think people will really get some enjoyment out of. First, I launched a wrestling Patreon, Wrestling According to Alba, because, you know, everyone's got their own perspective of professional wrestling. And I launched a Patreon, WrestlingAccordingToAlba.com. And it's kind of a place for me to get my unfiltered thoughts about the pro wrestling world out. And I've been offering them some little behind the scenes looks into the world of the extreme life of Matt Hardy too, the production process, what goes into this show. It's a lot of fun. So if you want to get in on that, pricing ranges from $4.99 a month to $39.99 a month. And I'm super appreciative of everyone who's hopped on there. That's WrestlingAccordingToAlba.com. But I'm most proud of this consulting service that I launched for aspiring or young or developing on-air talent, media talent, editorial, journalists, writers, whatever you may be, the Alba Media School. I've been working on this for more than a year, and it's a chance to have a personal one-on-one session with me at your choosing, however you want, whenever you want. And my goal is to help mentor and help develop skill sets in the world of media and journalism. And again, I highly, highly recommend you even just check out the pamphlet that I've uploaded, albamediaschool.com. I love mentoring, Matt. I know that's something you're really big on, you know, taking talent under your wing and trying to identify areas where they can improve. That's really important to me. I know that's important to you too.
That's very cool. So tell me a little more about this. Like what all do you offer for people that want to sign up and do your deal?
Yeah, so my idea is that one size doesn't fit all. So I feel like with my background in television, writing, podcasting, digital, editorial, I've kind of done just about everything in the last 10 plus years in media. And even in public speaking, how to improve that skill set so people can come to me with whatever part of that skill set they want to improve. Podcasting has obviously been a big one at the forefront for a lot of people as they all look to create content. We talk about content creation, and they can schedule a half hour, an hour session with me or a 2-hour session with me, and we'll go over their skill set and how they want to improve. And then I identify areas in their skill set that they can improve on and how they can do it. It's very much a coaching service and consulting. And it's funny, like you see a lot of athletes, right? Maybe they weren't the world's greatest catcher. They weren't a Hall of Fame catcher, but a catcher makes a great manager in baseball because I can identify and they know exactly what makes. And it's like that in wrestling too.
Absolutely.
Sometimes the best coaches never really had much of a career on the big stage. They know what they're doing at the end of the day.
Yep.
So that's the idea there. And we'll see.
Very, very cool. I'm very excited for these projects to develop and see where you go with this. And I think people will really enjoy, you know, sitting underneath your learning tree when it comes to all that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you know, my ideology, and I've said this over the years, I learned this from my mentor, Ian Eagle, pre-production is production.
Sure.
The amount of work you put in ahead of time is how good your quality of content will ultimately be. And you've seen firsthand here how much work goes into this show, just the
Right.
pre-production
Yeah,
element of it.
indeed.
And that's what usually leads to us having what I think is a pretty kick-ass podcast. So
I agree. I'll put it up against anyone's.
I am with you entirely. albamediaschool.com. Go check that and check out the archives of the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. If you have an extremehardy.com, I'm done plugging. I'm done wasting time. This is going to be one of our best episodes to date. Let's get to it, Matt Hardy. Hit us with your Eddie Guerrero episode, Matt Fact.
Matt Fact. Matt is not fond of modern day abbreviated texting.
Not a fan of abbreviated texting. So you're talking like LOL, LMAO, or are you talking autocorrect?
Everybody talks so short and so brief now. And I guess I get that why, but I'm a details person. I'm all about the details. You know, my wife, she'll text me like, "Oh, I need you to get something for Evie." Okay, well, I'll go look for it in the room. Tell me where it is. And she goes, "The drawer." What? Like there's 12 different drawers in there. Like be a little more specific. Give me details. I say that to her all the time. Like, I'm a detail person. Like, please just give it to me in detail. And I promise I will nail it out. But so many people do that, you know, whenever they're like texting, you know, whatever it may be, you know, leave RN, you know, leave right now, whatever, as opposed to like, well, where the fuck are we leaving from? You know, I just, there's so many times where people like shorten stuff down so much and there's not enough details to like understand truly what is going on. So I'm a details person, and I believe the devil's in the details.
I always feel bad when I'm badgering people because I'm very detailed, and I think you figured that out about me.
Oh, I'm down with a long text. It explains everything in depth.
But not everyone is. Not everybody likes that, so they get very overwhelmed by it. So.
And then often, like if there's a lot of times if there's a text where there's a lot of information that needs to be divulged, I would rather make it a call instead and just talk to someone.
And that's how I am too. Yeah, so we're kindred spirits on that. And a guy that was very detailed in his own right was, of course, Eddie Guerrero, incredibly detailed in all of his matches. And we're going to break that down here today. He was born October 9th, 1967, part of the legendary Guerrero lineage. As a boy, he would attend the wrestling promotions held by his father, Gory Guerrero, in El Paso. And his father actually allowed him to wrestle Chavo from an early age. So I want to ask you, in the context of the wrestling industry, what credibility does the Guerrero name carry?
I mean, it had a lot of equity in it right from the jump. You know, the Guerreros were very famous, and the fact that it was during intermission, right? They would go out during his shows and wrestle. The fact that Eddie and Chavo would go out there and wrestle at intermission as kids is just so amazing, and I love that so much. That's just such a great story.
He'd get his real start in the industry in 1986 at just 19 years old. And he's starting in the heat of the moment right there. CMLL, one of the bigger promotions in all Mexico. He's under the name Mascara Magica before eventually heading to AAA, maybe the biggest promotion in Mexico, in 1992. And it's there that Eddie really gets put on the map. He aligns with a guy that a lot of wrestling fans have probably heard of but might not know all that much about, Art Barr.
Right.
And the two of them team up with Conan, Madonna's boyfriend, and Chicano Power to collectively form Los Gringos Locos. I've talked about Los Gringos Locos on a few other podcasts. Was that ever on your radar when that stuff was happening?
Oh, it was. This was like pre-internet days, right? But I just remember how much press and like how, especially in wrestling magazines, and I was going, wow, these guys are getting all this huge press in Mexico. And we didn't see that as much. They were some of the first guys that were, you know, typically Americans that were going to Mexico that were getting this huge press, and they were over. There was a big following of those people at that time, and they were very hot.
They did some amazing work together, Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero. And a lot of people would look at the tag team and they thought that Art Barr was going to be the true star out of the two of them.
Yeah.
Those Mexican crowds in AAA, and they even ran some shows in Los Angeles too. The heat, if you want to talk about heat from a crowd, it's next level stuff.
What was it? When Worlds Collide in LA?
In LA, Jake the Snake Roberts was involved, and Conan was involved as well.
I remember that being a big deal. I remember a lot of buzz on that event, and especially Art Barr and Eddie's performances.
What is it about those Mexican crowds that just makes them so special to perform in front of, especially in terms of getting heat.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go back that far, they're very much there to be entertained, and they have this good guy that they're going to cheer for and pull for, and there's the bad guy that they're just going to loathe. You know, they are going to have all the disdain in the world for him, and they're very emotional people. You know, I think that's just kind of like a thing for Hispanics and Latinos. They get into shit, and that's great, especially whenever you would go in the 90s. If you were going to Mexico, it was always great because you know the heat was going to be real. If you were going to Puerto Rico, it was great because you knew the heat was going to be real. You know, Hispanic people, they take their stuff serious, and I love the passion behind them, and especially when it comes to wrestling, especially like booing the heel or you know having legitimate hatred for the people they're watching. That's when wrestling is at its best.
It almost sounds like you're speaking from experience there, talking about Latinos being very impassioned about the things they care about.
Oh man, when it's good, it's great, but when it's bad, holy shit! I do know from experience, as you know.
No whores allowed. So Art Barr really is the one that is standing out, and Eddie is too, and so much so that in late 1994 they get a call from a guy named Paul Heyman about bringing Los Gringos Locos into ECW, and they're about to come in 1995, and that's when Art Barr dies. He dies unexpectedly. He's super young, and Eddie all of a sudden is out on his own. Do you remember seeing any Art Barr in action, even in hindsight in years past?
Yes, I do remember looking for some. I sought it out and looked for it, especially after knowing Eddie. And he was a very amazing performer, way ahead of his time.
Do you think he rubbed off on Eddie and pushed Eddie to get even better?
Yeah, I mean, even I had a conversation with Eddie one time about that, and we were talking about, and it sounded like they pushed each other. That they were both very similar in their mindsets, and I would imagine they pushed each other.
It's said that Eddie himself thought that Art was going to be the breakout guy of the two of them, and that Art was going to be a superstar in pro wrestling. So that's fascinating that you said you talked about that with him, because I'm curious almost if he wore that as a badge of honor, that he felt he needed to live up to those expectations that were set with the two of them down in Mexico coming into the United States. But not only is he working in Mexico at this time, but he's also working in Japan for New Japan. And he's the second incarnation of Black Tiger. And eventually he'd even win the Best of the Super Juniors tournament, which is one of the most iconic tournaments in all of professional wrestling. How much influence did working in Japan have on his in-ring style, in your opinion?
I mean, I'm sure he picked up tools from wherever he worked, whatever territory, whatever promotion he was in, because like Eddie was like that. He was a sponge. He would soak up everything around him, and he would you know put it in his back pocket, and he would learn from it. So I'm sure everything influenced him. Lucha Libre stuff influenced him. The Japanese working style influenced him, and then he incorporated American working style also.
Was he a real student of the game when it came to studying the craft of professional wrestling?
I don't think you would think of him in terms of that like people do today, like going back and watching old stuff and you know like studying old matches and older different styles. I feel like he just grew up in wrestling.
It was instinct to him.
It was just instinct, and I think he just knew what he should be doing to you know garner a certain reaction from the crowds, and just he soaked up everything wherever he went as he became a world traveler. You know, and he kept a little tool from each one of those promotions, put it in his back pocket, made him into like a complete workhorse.
So he debuts in ECW on April 8th, 1995 at Three-Way Dance. And right away, he wins the World Television Championship against Too Cold Scorpio. You talk about two incredibly talented guys, Too Cold Scorpio and Eddie Guerrero in a debut match there. That's the essence of that high-flying style that ECW really owned in on. And he'd go on to...
But you look at current day, I mean, that's where today's current style is.
Right,
you know,
exactly.
They were ahead of their time because it is what wrestling became.
A lot of this episode is going to be about influence, because Eddie is really right there laying that foundation for a lot of what we see today. And so much so that he'd go on to have a ton of matches in ECW with Dean Malenko, a technician who influenced a lot of today's technicians. So you're seeing that influence still very much resonate today. And the matches that Dean and Eddie had put them on the radar for WCW. You mentioned in our ECW episode, available in our archives, extremehardy.com, that you loosely had your finger on the pulse of ECW at the time. Do you remember seeing any of those Malenko Guerrero matches or hearing about those Malenko Guerrero matches?
Yes. Yeah. Jeff and I, we love those matches. They were awesome. And I will say this: I can't tell you how many people from the Indies, like from Dean Malenko and Eddie Guerrero, when they would do like up, Hurricanrana, over, cover, roll through, boom, fish out of water. I mean, that sequence was stolen and became famous on the Indies in the 90s because of those two. And Jeff and I, we borrowed a lot of Dean Malenko versus Eddie Guerrero stuff, and also Rey Mysterio versus Psychosis stuff. So yeah, they were heavily influential, not only on pro wrestling, but on myself and my brother.
What was it about those matches that were so influential?
Yeah, for me, it was just they're wrestling the same way we want to wrestle, and that's what we were doing from, the beginning of Omega, which was ECWF and NFWA. Then it became Omega, and that's what really it's known for. That is the kind of style that we wanted to wrestle. That's what we desired to wrestle. And there were guys in North Carolina like Italian Stallion and George South's crew, the PWF, who didn't want to wrestle that. They wanted to wrestle old school, like get in the ring, call it, headlock, tackle, drop down, get it again. And it was nice to know that fundamental stuff, and I'm glad we learned all that fundamental stuff. But also, it was an exciting style that we also wanted to work. So it was great to watch them, and it was very inspiring.
Did you recognize at the time that they were paving a path and doing something different that nobody else was doing on that stage?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think there was a huge parallel between the stuff Eddie and Dean they were doing, the stuff Benoit was doing, and also the stuff Ray and Psychosis were doing in ECW. I mean, that really laid out what the professional wrestling style would become in years down the road.
So Eddie, Dean, and Chris Benoit ultimately make their way from ECW to WCW in late 1995. They form somewhat of a mini clique, if you will, the three of them. What do you remember their camaraderie being like between the three of them?
Oh, I mean, they were all best friends. I mean, they were there to be together and have each other's back through thick and thin, and that carried on throughout the years. And also too, when they came to WCW, and then also Rey Mysterio and Psychosis, I have to tie them in there as well. Like Uva too, they started doing the cruiserweight division. I mean, that really was so much more influential on modern day pro wrestling than anyone even gives credit for. People do talk about how great it was and how it was a huge part of the Nitro shows, but that really changed. That was the blueprint of what pro wrestling was going to become in the future.
So jumping ahead a little bit, because I was going to ask you about that, but since you brought it up, the cruiserweights of WCW provide something different on American television that's not being offered anywhere else at that time.
Yeah.
WWF is the land of the giants. They don't have light heavyweights at this time. Eventually, they'd bring in some light heavyweights, but the cruiserweights are doing something that nobody else is seeing on network television week in and week out. So what do you think the cruiserweights did for professional wrestling at the time? And what do you think they did in terms of influencing wrestling as we know it today?
I think the cruiserweights at that time and the division and the guys that were in there, and even smaller guys, I'm even going to classify like the Benoits, the Malenkos, the Guerreros in this category. Those guys who just had a very higher work rate. They were doing these exciting matches. They were doing these incredible combinations. They were doing moves that you don't typically see, and they changed wrestling where it looked a lot more like an athletic contest than just two guys out there performing, doing a Hulk Hogan comeback, or whatever it may have been. I mean, they really upped the ante and they took it to the next level. And I think there were people like, oh my God, I know these guys, it's pro wrestling and it is what it is, but these guys are amazing. And the stuff they're doing, it's so athletic, it's so acrobatic, and this is so incredible and so fun to watch. And I think that was a huge, huge driving point. Even though they had these big names, there were household names in WCW of why Nitro ended up winning the Monday Night Wars for a certain amount of the year. I think the cruiserweight division and the smaller guys who had this higher work rate and a newer style, I think that really played a huge difference in having fans go over to WCW at that time. How it affected things down the road, I mean, that's ultimately what pro wrestling was going to become. I mean, if you look at AEW now, it looks like that. If you look at even a lot of the stuff that WWE has as their main stories, it resembles that very closely. So they were definitely changing the way wrestling was going to be perceived, the way wrestling was going to be executed, and they were blazing a trail, man.
Yeah, I don't think Tony Khan falls in love with wrestling the way he does without discovering the likes of Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko and those
Sure.
cruiserweights, because he was enamored with them. He'd go to those ECW shows. He was watching the cruiserweight division, and yeah, we don't get AEW today, if that's the case. And Tony always talks about. I know you've talked about this at length, and a lot of people have criticized AEW for throwing on the Great Dream Match, right? And in maybe instead of having a great story, but the reality is there are a lot of people who watch wrestling because they just fucking love pro wrestling and they love just seeing an awesome match, the caliber of likes what you would see in a great cruiserweight match.
Right.
So there is merit to it, in my opinion. Most definitely there's merit to it. And speaking of those cruiserweights, your friend the Ocho just celebrated his birthday, if I'm not mistaken.
He did, yeah. Actually, right before we went on taping, I sent him a couple texts. I just realized that.
Dude is, I mean, amazing coming from that cruiserweight division to where he is now. Just that, and he was a big time colleague of Eddie as well. So
Yes.
The bond they formed was an important one as they go through the years here. But Eddie does, yes, Eddie does make his way to WCW, and he starts to make a name for himself in '96, particularly with a feud with DDP for the United States Championship, and he becomes one of the more versatile performers in all of professional wrestling. He's working cruiserweight matches, but then they're able to put him in the mid-card title picture if they want to. Did you have your eye on Eddie during this period of time? You're just you're working a little bit in New York, doing Omega stuff, getting some more casting calls to do enhancement work. Are you paying attention to a guy like Eddie?
100%. And we were excited whenever any of these guys made the jump from ECW to WCW, because that meant we could see them much more often on TV, and that was great. Yeah, definitely paying attention. And Eddie was on our radar. He was one of our favorites at that time. So for sure, man, we definitely we took his style and the way he worked, and we incorporated the things we were doing too.
That's what I was just about to ask you. Is it one of those things where you see someone who kind of works like you, kind of similar body size as you, and you say, well, if he can make it, maybe Jeff and I can make it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like when these guys, when Rey Mysterio, Psychosis, Eddie, Chris, Dean, these guys were making it, and we knew they were smaller. We're like, okay, the size standard is coming down. So that's a good positive for us. So yeah, it was definitely inspirational.
And that's where I think Eddie and his influence really resonates with so many people. You see it across other sports. If a guy like Muggsy Bogues can play in the NBA, well, then you can be 5'3", 5'4", and make the NBA one day. And it shows a smaller person that, hey, you got a shot. I think that's one of the underrated elements of where Eddie really hits with people in terms of inspiring them to get into professional wrestling. And at Halloween Havoc 1997, he's the Cruiserweight champion, and he faces your boy Rey Mysterio. It is mask versus title match, and this is considered to be one of the greatest matches of the 1990s, if not one of the most influential matches in professional wrestling history. Do you have any memories of seeing the Halloween Havoc match, and how do you think it stands the test of time all these years later?
It's one of my favorite matches ever. And the first thing I think about is when Ray does that springboard backflip into a DDT. Amazing.
And like big pop of the night for the crowd, and they're like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing, and I love that match. If I'm not mistaken, I think we were all over at Trace Goodell's, Trevor Lee's father's, and we watched the pay-per-view there. And I remember everybody was buzzing about that match, and we just thought it was so badass, and it was something that was so different that we hadn't seen on WCW program before. And just even that thing of him doing the backflip into that DDT, and it was flawless. It looked so amazing. Everything about that match we loved, and that was definitely. I think Jeff said, "Oh, let's go out to the ring. I want to try that." So right from the jump, it was a great match and a really breakthrough, monumental moment for those two.
Yeah, it really elevated Ray to another level too, in my opinion. It made him more than just a guy who did flips. There was great storytelling in the match with him trying to preserve the mask. It was tremendously well executed, and it's one of those matches where, and this is going to be a theme of what we talk about, And if you have any notes on it, feel more than free to interject. But it's one of those matches where you see the crowd is coming up for certain moments. And if you pay close attention, Eddie's starting to feed off of the crowd a little bit. And he's starting to maybe get a little more heat in certain areas. Reading crowds is that underrated element of a great professional wrestler that knows how to elevate themselves to that next level. You've said in the past, Eddie is and was one of the best to ever do that.
Yes.
Do you see a lot of that stuff in his early work?
I think so. I mean, I think once again, it was almost instinctual because he'd just grown up in the pro wrestling business and he'd watched his father and his family do it for so long. So he was always around it from a kid. So, I mean, once you're around it and you do it that much, it comes so much easier to you, especially if you love it and you enjoy it. I mean, Cameron Grimes, Trevor Lee, he's another great example of that. He was just around the business from when he was a little child. So I feel like it came easier to him. And it was probably, more instinct to him than anything else because he's been around it for so long his entire life. And I feel like that was the case with Eddie Guerrero.
Well, in 1998 and 1999, Eddie started to express some frustrations with WCW management and Eric Bischoff in particular. He kind of felt that his quality of work was there, but he wasn't being paid his worth and he wasn't being pushed at a high enough level. Were people in WWE, because you're signed at this point, you're in the locker room week in, week out, were they aware of the caliber of work that Eddie was putting on at this time? And was there any backstage talk in 98, 99 about maybe a guy like Eddie Guerrero could make a big impact here?
I know a lot of people in WWE were fans of Eddie. A lot of people knew Eddie. They had worked with him at some point, down the road or in the past. And I think people would always be interested in Eddie Guerrero coming to a WWE. Anybody that is extremely talented like that, especially when wrestling was so hot and the Monday Night Wars were raging at that time. I always think anytime you could grab a gifted performer from the other promotion, that's a win. And I think it was also what made wrestling so hot. I remember earlier on when wrestlers would show up in other promotions, that was always such a cool thing for myself and Jeff. So we always thought if Eddie, Chris, and those guys ended up coming to WWE, it'd be a very, very cool deal, and it would be a win for WWE.
Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. Because on January 31st, 2000, it's Raw, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn make the jump to the World Wrestling Federation, and they debut as the Radicals. This was a pretty damn big moment on the surface level. Benoit was literally just crowned WCW World Heavyweight Champion, and in typical WCW fashion, he ends up leaving immediately. When do you remember there being rumblings of them coming in as a unit?
A couple weeks before they did. And I remember like being an ongoing joke with a lot of the people in the WWE locker room said, "Oh my God, I just left Gold's Gym. Eddie, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko were there, or whatever it be." It was like a running joke in WWE. So they were very disgruntled. They were very unhappy, and they were doing what they could to get out of WCW. And I feel like at that point we knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up in New York, brother.
Were you surprised that Vince took a flyer on all four of those guys? Because none of them scratch the itch or check the boxes for what Vince was typically looking for in a performer, let alone a potential main event caliber performer at that time.
I think Vince was aware enough of the situation, how much possibility there was with those guys, especially, nothing against Perry, but especially, Eddie, Chris, and Dean. I think Vince knew that they were over and people liked them and people were interested in them. And if they could draw interest, then they could sell tickets. And that's kind of how Vince thinks as a businessman, obviously. So it wasn't the people that, were made from the mold in Vince's image in his head, the guys that he would love to have be his main eventers, but he knew there was something there with those guys. So he rolled the dice and brought them in, obviously.
Well, it's ironic you say that, the Perry comment, because Bruce Pritchard has talked about this on his podcast, Something to Wrestle. They thought Perry Saturn was going to be the breakout of the four of them.
Interesting.
And as we know, that ultimately was not the case, but they thought he was going to be the breakout of the four Radicals.
I almost feel like Perry being, paired with those other three guys was hard on Perry, because then like he had to work at that exact same level. And Perry was good. Perry was talented, but like All three of those guys, and especially in what they did best. Like Dean with the scientific wrestling, Eddie with reading the crowd, Chris Benoit with just being a straightforward kick-ass wrestler. I mean, those guys were all on another level. So it was very hard, I think, with Perry being paired with them because it just I don't think he was going to live up to the expectations of those other guys. So I almost feel like it'd been better if Perry had came in on his own and did something else later.
I think they viewed him as more the prototypical WWE kind of guy, a little more sports entertaining. Maybe he can fit in that mold a little more. And ultimately, he's not the one that breaks out here, as we know. I believe in the past, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the past you've mentioned on this podcast that you remembered running into a couple of them the night that they were coming in. Is that Matt fact or is that Matt fiction?
It was the Matt fact is the story with Chris Benoit, and I think we may have seen Eddie there too. And we were both in Toronto. If I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correct, I feel like he won the WCW title in Toronto. I don't know. Maybe you could pull that up or look, whatever. But like we had a house show and they had a live event, and Edge and Christian knew Chris Benoit from their past and doing stuff in the Indies and in Canada, obviously, all being Canadians. And he said, "Oh, let's go over. We're going to go talk to him or whatever and hang out. Like, come with us." And it was the first time that we saw Chris Benoit, myself and Jeff, that we met him in real time. And he was pretty wasted when we saw him. He was drinking that night, sitting in a chair. I remember he had on some shades and they were like broken and like crooked on his face. It looked so funny. And I remember he came up and Adam and Jay just said, "Hey, Chris, these are our friends, Matt and Jeff Hardy." There's stuff. He says, Yes, I've seen you. And I remember he like puts out his fist like to do a fist bump. And I stuck out my fist and he goes, wham! And he hits me. I was like, oh, fuck. And then I remember Jeff says, and like he puts out his fist for Jeff, and Jeff goes like, oh, and he pulls it back as soon as he hits it or whatever. Like he was aggressive. And he said, "I will see you soon." And then Chris always, after they came to WWE, like for a year, he would apologize. He said, "I'm so sorry. I was so drunk that night. I hope I didn't do anything bad." It's like, "No, man, you're fine. You're fine." But yeah, that was our first run in with Chris Benoit, which was insane.
So he won the title in Cincinnati.
Okay. Well, then they had something in Toronto. If there's a pay-per-view, I don't know, maybe you can search that. There was a pay-per-view they had in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken, and we had a house show. And then we were able to meet up after that.
So bringing those four guys in, this is the time where WCW, they lose a ton of money in 1999. The booking is all over the place. Did you feel that bringing the four of those guys in was firmly going to sway the momentum of the war in your favor?
I don't know if I thought about it in that term. I just thought it was a win for WWE. I mean, I thought it was a great thing, and I thought they were, four talented individuals, and they were going to make an impact. I didn't think about numbers and ratings as much at that time. I was just there thinking about doing a kick-ass job in the ring.
Well, I'm sure you and Jeff are looking forward to working with those guys in the ring too.
For sure, yeah.
Influential, new opponents, all that good stuff. So, Eddie is teaming with Perry Saturn in their first match against the New Age Outlaws. And he gets hurt. He realizes it. He hurts his shoulder. He realizes it. And he calls the finish on the fly, leading to the Outlaws picking up the win. So Eddie does the job in his first match in WWE because of this injury. What was his ring awareness like for situations like that? Because that is a hell of a selfless decision to do the job in his debut, realizing that he's hurt.
Bro, he was a pro. I mean, and that's how more people should think. Just be a pro. Go out there, and if something goes wrong in the match and you're hurt, you can't do it, then take it home. Even if you get beat, whatever. You can always course correct later. He was a pro.
Yeah. And he would take a couple months to recover, but Matt Hardy, I've got some good news for you. You don't need a couple months of recovery when you're taking your AG1s every single day. It's the perfect way to make sure your body gets daily recovery. And it's one of our favorite partners here on the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. What is this stuff? I'm talking about one delicious scoop of AG1 and you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day right. It's a special blend of ingredients supporting your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, aging, all of those things. And it's so affordable, isn't it, Matt? That's like the best part about it. You and I got dinner last week, and I was I was thinking, man, that drink probably costs a good like $14, $15. It's a hotel bar. But with AG1s, it's costing you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health. It's cheaper than your cold brew habit, cheaper than getting all those different supplements yourself. It is an all-in-one nutritional insurance. It goes down a little easier than some of those beverages too, doesn't it?
You're right. And this is the bottle that I drank my AG1s in this morning.
There you go. I love it. And it's lifestyle friendly as well. Whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy free, or gluten free. Matt went for a salad. I went for wings. That should tell you everything you need to know about us. It contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals, artificial anything, while still tasting good. And it also supports better sleep quality, recovery, mental clarity, and alertness. It's one thing with the best things. Athletic Greens uses the best of the best products based on the latest science with constant product iterations and third-party testing. And right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. Just 1 scoop in a cup of water every single day. That is it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D. And how many free travel packs, Matt Hardy?
They are going to give you 5 free travel packs.
You don't even have to lie, cheat, or steal. We'll give them right to you. All you got to do is visit Athletic
Make
Greens.
it easy.
Yes, all you got to do is visit athleticgreens.com/Hardy. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/Hardy to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. And we thank them for sponsoring our podcast here. No lying, cheating, or stealing for AG1s. We got them taken care of here. So after the injury, he takes a couple months, and in March, he's wrestling as a heel, and he begins to pursue the affections of one China. He refers to her as Mamacita. And eventually she sides with him. And he's doing some work with Chris Jericho. Guerrero was paired with Lita and Essa Rios for a period of time. He abandons them. He tries to charm China and take her to prom. He just earned his GED, so he takes her to prom. I want to talk about China and Eddie for a minute. As a kid, this was one of my favorite pairings. They had so much chemistry together.
They did.
What did you think of the two of them?
They worked. I mean, what an odd couple in many, many ways, but they totally worked, and they played off of each other perfectly. They were so damn good together.
I feel like that was right up Vince's alley, seeing Eddie.
Oh, 100%. Vince loved Eddie during that time. He thought that was the most entertaining shit ever. And I think at that point, he was 100% sold on Eddie, had the most personality of all the 4 that was there. Vince loved Eddie during that time.
This is when he introduces the lowriders. He's coming out with the roses, pops it in his mouth. This is some of the character stuff he wasn't getting to do in WCW that I think he really wanted to do.
Right.
Did you notice that? What was his attitude like at that time?
I mean, he was happy. He seemed like he was extremely enjoying it, and that's one thing that can be understated. Eddie Guerrero was a great character, and he had a great mind for like character stuff as well. You know, the whole lie, cheat, and steal deal that he did was amazing. You know, it was just put such a different spin on pro wrestling, which I love that so much. But the stuff he did with China, he was all in and he was committed to it. His facial expressions were great. And I think Vince said, like, wow, this guy really has everything that I do like, because he knows how to make his money here too, you know, as opposed to just being a great in-ring wrestler.
During that time, you have your first match ever with Eddie. It's a tag match with you and Jeff beating him and Essa Rios, 2 incredible talents in both of them. Do you have any recall of that match and what it was like facing Eddie for the first time?
I remember that match, not great, but I do remember having that match and how we thought it was going to be cool to wrestle Eddie, and it ended up being a pleasure. I got to wrestle him more as time went on, but I remember really enjoying that first match with him.
Yeah, well, we talked about in our King of the Ring 2000 episode in the archives, but you faced him in a King of the Ring qualifier. He beat you with a Hurricane Rana into a quick pin there. I watched this match back yesterday in preparation for this. I like this match a lot, and the crowd was really into it. This is your first singles opportunity with him. What did he bring out from a singles perspective in you?
I mean, I feel like he had some of the same qualities that Benoit had. I mean, he would really push people, and I think he would want to try different things. He wasn't afraid to push someone out of their comfort zone as opposed to what they do in the ring. Like, let's try this, let's do something new, especially if you could work together on a house show and kind of master it at that point. So I think he was really good at pushing people to like expand, their moveset and also their ability to do different things in the ring.
Is he calling the match? Is he leading? Is he allowing input from you? What does that process look like?
Yeah, no, I mean, those guys were so funny. Like they said, no, we want to be very respectful of you guys. This is your company. You were here first. Eddie and Chris would both do that. Like, let's figure out what we want to do. Like you're kind of the veteran here or whatever. And he was a sweetheart. I mean, it's so funny because whenever he would go out through the curtain and you see him like beating his chest, Viva la Raza, and all fired up, then he comes back through the curtain and he kind of like, he expands when he goes out, and then he kind of like then he like gets back. Oh yeah, thank you, brother. That was great. Like totally like cuts it off. He would like turn it on when he goes out and cuts it off. He was such a quiet, soft spoken, humble dude.
Was he an introverted extrovert? If that makes any sense.
I think so. That's a probably good description.
Yeah, I've always picked up on that from afar. That he could exude that vibrato and confidence. And I know that when he had an attitude, he could let it be shown, but a little more soft-spoken in that sense. Did a lot of the locker room at this time, 2000, as he's coming in, did he fit in well with the WWF locker room?
Yeah. I mean, everybody liked him. And there's a lot of things about Eddie Guerrero that remind me of my brother, too. Like, very soft-spoken, very quiet, super humble, just like real nice, real quiet. And then they go through the curtain, they turn it on. They're this larger than life rock star, right? But also, I can say for Eddie and Jeff, as nice and as humble as they were, like if they would be altered on whatever it was, then they could turn into a monster, quick, fast, in a hurry, which is crazy. They could do a complete 180.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in just a minute here. At Armageddon 2000, it's Perry, Guerrero, and Dean against Team Extreme in an elimination match. We're probably not going to cover this one in depth. Do you have any memories of that match and that feud? It was primarily focused around you guys defending Lita against Dean Malenko, who was making advances on her. Do you have any recollections of that match? That's the night of the Hell in a Cell, the 6-man Hell in a Cell.
Is it where Rikishi gets the choke slam?
Rikishi falls off the cell with the choke slam onto the truck.
Yeah. I remember that match. I don't remember this one great either.
Yep.
But I do remember Vince was all in on this Dean Malenko as like James Bond, or the guy who
the ladies man,
Dean Malenko. He was all in on, and Dean
was that a rib?
Maybe,
okay.
Probably.
All right.
Dean's like this married man who like doesn't fuck around, whatever. And I think he was pretty uncomfortable doing it.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, they wanted to build to that match where it was going to be him versus Lita. And then we were going to figure out a way where myself, Jeff, whoever interferes, and she wins. And then I remember he hurt his knee, and Dean had to go away for a little while and do surgery. And they figured they would just drop the angle or whatever it was. But as soon as he came back, Vince picked it up immediately, right again, too. And they ended up going through with it. So I know Dean did all that, and I think he did his best to try and make it work and make it as entertaining as possible. But I do feel like Vince put him in that uncomfortable situation just because it was something he probably felt awkward doing. Vince would do that to people every so often. He would just put them in uncomfortable situations that would push them out of their comfort zone. So in his explanation, they would grow.
He sold a lot for Lita. He gave her a lot in those matches. I watched some of it back, but it's not getting crazy reactions. It's not doing any crazy sort of business. It kind of, even on that pay-per-view, it's just somewhat there. Everyone was wanting to see that 6-man Hell in a Cell match, which, man, you want to talk about a microcosm of the WWF main event scene at the time. You had Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Triple H, and the baddest man of them all, Rikishi, in this Hell in a Cell match. Just a totally loaded roster. And you guys are trying to find your spot on it, as is Eddie. So just insane amounts of talent at that time. And he would go on to win the European Championship for a second time at WrestleMania X7. But just a few weeks later, you get one of your first real big single moments in WWE. It's April 26th on SmackDown. You're facing him for the European Championship. And Terry is in his corner. And after the referee, Teddy Long, was inadvertently distracted, holla holla, Lita hits a Hurricane Rana off the top on Eddie. You hit a Twist of Fate, and you win your first singles gold in WWE. What was that night like for you?
Very, very cool. Eddie was great to work with, and he was like, "Oh yeah, congratulations! Congratulations! I'm so happy you're getting this moment." And it was a really weird decision. Like, there wasn't really any rhyme or reason behind it, but Vince was, I guess, high on myself and Jeff at that time, and he just decided that I was going to win the European title from Eddie Guerrero. There really wasn't like a huge purpose behind it or whatever, but it was, I guess, a reward for being good employees and for growing. And I guess Vince liked what we were doing at that time.
Well, and the crowd loved it. The crowd was super into it. They popped big for you winning that title.
Yeah, it was a cool moment, especially doing that with Eddie, which was super neat.
Yeah, it's a good little match. Go check that out on the Cock if you haven't yet done so. The next weekend, you'd retain the title at Backlash against him and Christian.
Yeah.
Those are two of your favorite guys you've ever been in the ring with, all in one match. Was that a cool little one for you to put in the pocket there?
Yeah, this was in Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. If you can look that up, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So, funny story with this. I remember we got there that day, and we knew we were doing a three-way, right? And Jay and I, we had got together, and we were going to start talking about the match a little earlier on the day, and we were looking for Eddie, and we couldn't find Eddie all day long at all. And we found Eddie a little while later, and we could tell he'd kind of had an episode earlier that day. So myself and Jay, we just put it together, and then we kind of told Eddie everything he was doing in the match. And all throughout that match, like, we were yelling at Eddie to, like, keep him in line, keep him in check, to do what he was doing. And I don't know if you watch that match back. I don't know if you can tell or not, but, like, literally myself and Jay put that whole match together, and we just clued Eddie in on the stuff he was going to do in the match. And
was he seamless with it?
He was good. He just had to be given direction the whole while. I mean, he was good. He was in a good state of mind at that time, and it's just one of those wild scenarios, right on the end of the Wild Wild West days, and we got him through that match. And he was fine when he was out there. He just, like, just earlier in the day, he wasn't there for it. So it was one of those things that I know myself and Jay, we were pretty proud that we got through that in one piece.
Yeah. We'll get into that momentarily here, but he'd actually turned babyface shortly after this and start teaming with you and Jeff in some trios matches in May against teams like Edge, Christian, and Rhino, Malenko Sound and Jerry Lynn, X Factor, one of the greatest stables in the history of professional wrestling. What was it like having Eddie tag team with you guys? Any fun stories from that time?
It was fun how he was all in. He said, like, "Oh, I'm going to wear a Team Extreme shirt today." He said, "Hey, Jeff, can you make me some of those arm things?" So I think I would do that. I mean, and this was like this story. I remember we tried to get answers for this. Like, we wanted to know where this story was going. And really the only thing we kind of got from Vince, that it was open-ended. Like, I don't know, maybe we make Eddie a full-fledged babyface, and he gets over because of this thing. Is it, or maybe he's, like, just trying to infiltrate Team Extreme, and then we have him turn on you and he becomes a bad guy and we do whatever. But as we know, we wouldn't end up finding out how this story would play out.
But did you like tagging with him and having
Yeah, it was great. I mean, and he was so much fun. Just such a sweetheart and a nice guy in general. He was just very fun to be around anytime you're there. So yeah, it was a lot of fun doing that stuff with him. And I love the fact that he was just all in on it. He was all in whenever he started doing something like that, and he would be super entertaining.
Unfortunately, as you alluded to, this was a somewhat rough period of time for him. He was sent to rehab after suffering from an addiction setback as a result of abusing painkillers from a car accident in 1999. He would miss the entirety of the Invasion angle, which is unfortunate because that seems like a really cool opportunity for him, given his background with WCW and ECW. He would have played a natural part in that storyline, but He misses the whole thing. And then in November, he's arrested for drunk driving and released. You mentioned Eddie was one of the more likable guys in the locker room. What kind of concern was there for him? How'd the locker room feel about him ultimately getting cut here?
I mean, people were sad to see him go, but I mean, once again, it was very obvious that he needed help. So I mean, it's really the only decision they could make at that time. So he had to get help. He had to change his ways. He had to change his life. And I remember the day. I feel like we were supposed to do some kind of pretty crucial segment in what we were doing, and he was discovered that day messed up in the locker room. I remember seeing him before he left, and he's like, "No, I'm fine, I'm fine." And that was his last day there. So it's just fortunate that he was able to get his shit together, and he came back, and they gave him another opportunity.
That's exactly what happens, Matt. He returns to WWE the following April by attacking Rob Van Dam. He's back. And in June, you get a chance to work with him again, and you work a few house shows with him. So I'll ask you a couple questions here. One, what do you remember his improved state of mind looking like at the time? And two, how did this all come about? Because on the surface level, it seems a little random that you would just be thrown in with Eddie Guerrero on a few random house shows all of a sudden.
Yeah. It came to be because this was the following weekend after Stone Cold Steve Austin had left. Whenever what did JR say? He took his ball and went home, or
Yes,
whatever the quote was.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it really stays tied to that story. But he had left, and Stone Cold, who was the biggest draw in the company then, was advertised to be on these house shows. And I'll never forget coming in, and Albuquerque was the first night we were working together, and Jack Lanza, who was the agent at this show, said, "Look, I need you and Eddie Guerrero," and he brought me and Eddie in. He said, "Look, I need you two guys to go out, and I need you to give me a kick-ass 15-minute match, like a pay-per-view match. Like go a lot harder than you would normally go for, a house show, because what we're going to do, we're going to have the first match, and then we're going to announce to the crowd. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, Stone Cold Steve Austin cannot be here tonight. So if you want a ticket refund, it has to be done within the next 15 minutes. And then all of a sudden, Hardy Boys music hits. Dun, 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 and then Eddie Guerrero. And then immediately we jump into this match and we go crazy. And we end up going that night. Like, there was so much stuff that he called on the fly, especially in Albuquerque. And with the population there were things that Eddie changed. We ended up going like 16 or 17 minutes. And we came back through, and Jack Lund said, "That's a hell of a job, boys. A hell of a job. You guys killed it, but it was just too heavy. All I need is 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I don't need anything past that." And then Eddie's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. It was me. Like, I drug it out. I wanted Matt to do a little more right here. And I thought I would do this. But I'm so sorry. It was me." And Jack said, "It's okay." He said, "We're going to do this every night of the loop." And the next night, I believe we were in San Diego. We were there, same scenario. We get out there, we start wrestling, and there's one point where Eddie goes outside and grabs the chair and throws it in the ring. And the ref's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Get the chair, get the chair." And he's going to get it, and Eddie's fighting with him. He says, "Take it out of the ring." And then Eddie grabs another chair and nails me for the heat or whatever. And this is all caught on the fly. And then we're having the match. And I said, "Eddie, my mental clock, my internal clock is ticking. We're at 15. We have to be." And he's like, "No, just stay. Go to a hold again." And whatever. He said, "Take your time coming up. Let the crowd come. Let the crowd come." And then we're sitting there, and we finish, and we do this. And I get out, and we got back on and said, "Holy shit, that match was even better than last night's. But guys, you went fucking 19 minutes. I need 15 minutes." And Eddie said, "Man, I was just listening to me. It was my fault. It was my fault." So it's all right, man. It's all right. And then the last night we're in Bakersfield. And I think Eddie had been a heel the night before, the way things went. And in Bakersfield, he ended up being a big baby face. So then shit got all changed around. And we're out there, we're working, we're doing this. And I said, "Eddie, we need to go. We need to go." He said, "No. Go out of the ring. Out of the ring. No. And they're doing this, whatever. And I was like, "Eddie, we're definitely over 50. No, just wait. Trust me. Fuck." We do the deal. We finish. We come back. And Jack Lynn said, "Holy shit. That was a killer match, guys. I mean, that worked, but you went fucking 22 minutes. I'm so sorry. It was me. It was me, Jack. I just so it every night it continually got longer. Every single night that we worked on those house shows, and that's one of my favorite Eddie Guerrero stories.
That is amazing.
He was so impassioned in the ring and just so driven. No, we're making magic out here, and the people are into this, and they're not ready to crescendo yet. Fuck it, we got to keep going. We got to do this. We got to do that, because I feel this crowd. And then every time we came back, Jack Lynn said, "It was a great match, but fuck, you went 22 minutes. I said,
Did you feel like those were some of the best singles matches of your career to that point?
They were some of the most fun, for sure.
Yeah.
And probably so, because at this point I hadn't done a ton of singles matches. It was just here and there, because we were just, through and through the Hardy Boys. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was definitely fun working with him.
That's one of my favorite stories you've told on this podcast so far. We're at episode 45. That's so great, because I feel like that embodies Eddie Guerrero, right?
Yeah. I feel like I'm pretty gifted at like having a mental picture of how much time has passed whenever I'm in the ring. And like, if you need me to hit a certain time, I kind of know. I have a good internal clock. Eddie was one of those guys. He was terrible at taking time. You know, he had no idea. He just lived in the moment. Which was the Hardy Boys expression, by the way. He lived in the moment and he just felt everything out there. And if it was good, he just wanted to keep going and he wanted to keep entertaining the crowd. Fuck the time.
Well, Matt Hardy, if your internal clock is telling you that it's time to clean yourself up for the holiday season, well, you don't even need a reminder from me, because our friends at Manscaped have got you covered for this holiday season, because I'm giving my thanks to our friends over at Manscaped this holiday season. I don't know if you are, but I'm pretty sure you are.
Absolutely.
Everyone loves three things this time of the year. They love the acclaimed, they love turkey, and they love stuffing. And you'll be looking like dessert with the help of Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming have blessed you with the ultimate Thanksgiving dinner topic. Tell your in-laws about your new cutting-edge ball trimmer and gift yourself, or the man in your life, the ultimate men's hygiene bundle. Trim your pumpkins by going to manscaped.com and use code Hardy for free shipping and 20% off.
Thank you, Manscaped.
Yes, gracias. Muy preciado. Because you think your holiday spread's good? It's time to give thanks to Manscaped's Performance Package 4.0, or as we like to call it here, the perfect package for your package. Inside, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, the mower of lawns. You'll find the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, the Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold your goodies. It's like a cornucopia for your testicles. Think of it in those terms, okay? The Performance Package 4.0 includes that Weed Whacker, Senor Benjamin's absolute favorite tool for all his gardening and personal needs, to chop your worst weeds up on top of your nose and ear. Does he have some hairy nose and ears that he's got to take care of there?
Not with Manscaped, he doesn't.
That's right. He's even manscaping Logan the bear, I hear.
Right, you're correct.
Keeping him trim in the Hardy living room. This nose and ear hair trimmer uses a 9,000 RPM motor-powered 360-degree rotary dual blade system to provide proprietary skin-safe technology, which helps prevent nicks, snags, tugs in all of those delicate holes. And we want to help you here with the gift of Manscaped. Get 20% off and free shipping with code Hardy at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with the free shipping at manscaped.com. Use code Hardy. Be thankful this holiday season for the best gift of all from Manscaped. Your balls will thank you. I will thank you. Matt Hardy will thank you. Matt, after you shave with Manscaped, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling like $1 million.
$1 million.
Clean up big money, Matt. Manscaped does it.
There you go. You don't even have to win the Powerball to feel like $1 billion, because you can do that with Manscaped. So go check that out. 20% off, free shipping. That is a good deal, and we thank them for sponsoring our podcast here. You mentioned that he was supposed to face off with Steve Austin. That was going to be his feud, and you're filling in. That feels like
I don't know if that was specifically going to be.
It was.
It was? Okay.
He was set to face Steve Austin. They were running those house shows because that was going to be the feud that was going to be coming.
Gotcha.
And Steve has talked about that. That feels like a dream match that we just never got. And what a shame.
Yeah. Oh, that would have been incredible.
I feel like they would have worked so well together. But you felt like at this point, 2002, he's back. He's in a good place at this time?
Yeah, he was in a great place.
Okay. Well, afterwards, we'd really start to see him come into his own in WWE. This is where Eddie Guerrero turns it up, and we get the lie, cheat, and steal character. And he's teaming with his beloved Guerrero family member, Chavo, to form Los Guerreros. You worked with the two of them a couple times when you're with Shannon. What were they like as a unit? How did Chavo complement Eddie?
They were fun. They were fun working together, and I think it was great for Chavo. I mean, it had to be so much fun wrestling beside as a tag team partner and being a tag team champion with the guy that you wrestled at intermission when you guys were kids. So I thought it was good. I mean, obviously the family, their blood, they trusted one another. They worked well together, and they were a great team. And the whole lie, cheat, and steal thing really took off. It was incredible how much it did take off.
It changed the dichotomy of what a babyface and heel could be too, because this was a heel tactic, lie, cheating, and stealing, but he did it in such an endearing way that he clued the crowd in on the magic trick, and they could enjoy that with him. This is some revolutionary stuff for how characters are portrayed in wrestling.
Also, something even more impressive than that, it got like disqualification finishes over.
Yeah,
would cheer for them.
You know how much I hate DQs, and his last match ever is such a great DQ, and it's a finish I've seen replicated a million times on the indies, where a guy slaps the mat with the chair and then tosses the chair as the ref turns around, and he sees the other guy holding the chair as he's done a back bump. What a great finish that is. And you're right, it embodied all that stuff, and it got DQs over. It's really outstanding stuff. And your last match with Eddie comes in October of 2003 on a SmackDown in Milwaukee. He defends the United States Championship against you while you're doing the V1 here. Do you have any memories of that match in particular? And how close did you feel like Eddie was to breaking through that ceiling and becoming something more than that?
I enjoyed that match. I always enjoyed Eddie's company, and just like the brotherhood that Eddie always offered everyone. So I do remember that match, and I remember enjoying it too. And I remember kind of being established as a heel at that time and getting to work against Eddie, being such a fun character with a lot of cheat and steal stuff was just a lot of fun, man.
Did you feel that momentum that the crowd was really starting to get behind Eddie as a baby?
Yeah. You could feel that was happening. It was a very organic and real thing. They were fully and solidly getting behind Eddie.
And at some point, as you've talked about on this podcast, that kind of thing just becomes undeniable. You can't push back when the fans are pushing back even harder.
Yeah, I mean, and to his credit, I mean, Vince would always usually capitalize on that. If something happened organically and the people got behind it, he would run with it.
Well, in January of 2004, Chris Benoit wins the Royal Rumble, and we are about to see a major change for the dynamics in WWE.
Right.
Eddie is on the SmackDown brand. Chris moves over to Raw after he wins the Rumble, and Eddie becomes a top guy on SmackDown. He wins a Rumble in his own right on SmackDown and earns the right to face Brock Lesnar at No Way Out. And he does that in the Cow Palace, winning the WWE Championship for the first time. A former cruiserweight is now WWE Champion, defeating Brock Lesnar. Before I talk about the implications of what this meant, do you have any memories from that night at the Cow Palace?
I remember being just overly excited and happy for Eddie that he was getting that moment and that opportunity, because he is someone who was absolutely deserving of it. And Brock was great in there with him. Brock was all in too, 100%. Brock always been a consummate professional, really, in that capacity. But I just remember thinking, like, man, this guy's been through so many struggles, so many ups, so many downs, and just it's so great that he is having this big moment where he finally wins the big one, and everyone looks at him as a hero. It was just, I was very happy for him, and he was someone who was very deserving of that moment. So I'm just glad it happened.
We always discuss on this podcast how great pro wrestling can be when the fans feel with the journey of the performer and they feel with that pursuit.
Right.
That reaction is one of the most insane reactions in WWE history when he wins that championship. And it's a B pay-per-view for SmackDown, but everyone's talking about this, and it goes down as one of the most memorable championship matches in company history because of that. But most importantly, it's a big shift in how performers are looked at in WWE, because now a guy like Eddie is champion, and guys like Eddie were not supposed to be champion. Did that give any hope to the locker room, even to guys like yourself? Or I know Jeff wasn't necessarily there at the time, but maybe a guy like Jeff that, hey, one of us Hardy Boys could maybe be a world champion one day too.
I think so. I think once again, it just really displayed how the business was evolving and how it was changing, and how it wasn't always about having this, big guy who was a monster, or, a guy who doesn't necessarily fits Vince's image for a world champion becomes the world champion. And he did that over his his great in-ring work. And also too, like Vince loved him as a character. Vince was a big Eddie Guerrero fan. I don't know how much that's been talked about, but I do know that, especially with our interactions when we were doing the stuff with him before. And I know whenever they'd be going over stuff or rehearsing stuff, and like Vince would kind of do his thing and mimic him dancing or whatever, this is kind of how I see this. I mean, he really enjoyed the character that Eddie Guerrero was, and he was all in on pushing him. So yeah, it was very cool to see a smaller guy who was started as a cruiserweight get that opportunity to hold the top title in WWE.
And then you call her Mamacita, and you give her a rose, and then maybe you take a tomato, you take a carrot, you take an apple.
Right.
Do you have any Vince specific stories with Eddie that you can remember?
I don't know. I remember a couple of times when I remember seeing Vince one time sitting in one of the cars when it bounced up and down, and I thought it was the funniest thing ever. And he was losing his mind laughing too. Whenever they brought it in, they had those hydraulics on it. But there would be things like that, like especially during the Eddie Chinatown, and I'm sure Vince produced a lot of those things. I know there were times where he wanted certain expressions in the angle that he did with Team Extreme. Yeah, I don't really have a specific story, but I do know he was fond of Eddie.
That's great insight. And then at WrestleMania 20, Kurt and Eddie have the match. You mentioned in the past that's one of your favorite matches from that era, that time that Eddie had. He and Kurt at WrestleMania, and Chris Benoit wins the World Heavyweight Championship that night. And there's this seismic shift here where guys who were not prototypical champions are now champions. And he gets the big moment with Chris at the end of the night. It's somewhat of a bittersweet visual now, but do you remember people talking about how that show went off the air at Madison Square Garden with Eddie hugging Chris like that?
Yeah, I mean it was special, and people really enjoyed it, and I feel like it did show that WWE was kind of on the pulse of the evolution of pro wrestling. Especially for that moment to happen with those two, and like everybody who knew them, were just very happy for them that they got that moment together. Something that everyone felt like at that time they both deserved.
Yeah, I mean Eddie beats Kurt Angle, Chris beats Triple H and Shawn Michaels. That's a pretty significant thing. And Eddie would go on to hold the title for the summer. He'd have that feud with your boy JBL. Well, hell, and if you recall, he got busted open hard one time.
Maybe Eddie Guerrero will cut his head off in this. Well, hell.
Yeah, do you have a story from that or any memories of that?
I remember it was a bloodbath. It was like a brutal thing, and I feel like JBL was even worried about him as the course of the match was going on, because he bled like mad, where like he was going to bleed so much he wasn't going to make it through the match.
It said that he hit an artery while he was cutting himself, and he would actually pass out backstage and have to be brought to the hospital. But a local medical facility. But he would be okay. Thankfully.
I think you can say hospital now.
We can say hospital. It's crazy. It's off the band phrase list, so that's back on there. Thank you, Hunter, for that. But yeah, Eddie has the run. In 2005, he's doing some work with Dave Bautista, and he's apparently Dominic Mysterio's father. I don't know if you knew that. You heard that. But Eddie still, even as he's going between babyface and heel, he is looking like somebody that is going to be a main event player for years to come in WWE until November 13th, 2005. And that's when Eddie was found unconscious in his hotel room in Minneapolis by Chavo. And there's a really, really heartbreaking but very well done Dark Side of the Ring episode on all of this. He had been brushing his teeth and he passed out, and Chavo discovered him. And unfortunately, by the time the paramedics got there, he was gone. He was just 38 years old. He died of heart failure. I remember as a fan just being decimated by this. I cannot even imagine what it was like being in that locker room. How do you remember finding out that Eddie had passed?
Uh, I remember coming to the building that day and walking in, and people were upset. Someone was crying, and then I was told. That's how I learned, and obviously extremely shocking.
Yeah, because it's not just we're losing a legend here, and he had reached that status. He's an all-time great performer at that point, but this is a guy who was universally beloved in that locker room. Everyone loved Eddie Guerrero. How
Hmm.
do you remember navigating those next 24, 48 hours with the rest of your coworkers there?
Um, I mean, obviously, it's heartbreaking and shocking, and just it's like you don't even want to believe it's real. You know, when you hear something like that, especially someone that you work with so much and you spend so much time with them and you have these bonds with them. Um, I just remember the tribute show. We just said like if this is the last thing we're going to be able to give Eddie, let's like give it our all and make this special and make it important, just like he would want it to be. It just didn't seem real. It didn't seem real that he was gone.
How long did it take to set in for a lot of the guys out there?
I mean, he was a beloved figure in the locker room, so it was tricky. It was tough, you know. But guys, I remember the day of the show. We just tried to make it a celebration of his life and career,
Hmm.
and we tried to honor him in the best way that we possibly could. And just as far as setting in and accepting his death, it just you know, it was tough, but just it's you have to do it, and you know you have to move on. So it was just very sad, very unfortunate. He left us way too soon.
Do you remember your last conversation with Eddie by chance?
The the last conversation that I really remember having, and it would have been a while before he died. I mean, just tons of small talk, whatever. Just saying that I was so happy that he got to win the championship and he got to be in the slot of being looked at as like a a main event guy, and he's making main event money, and he was just killing it on every degree. And I just remember he said, "Oh, thank you so much, Matt. Like, you and your brother are such sweethearts. It's been such a pleasure to work with you guys and share a locker room with you guys. Thank you so much. That is so sweet of you saying that." And that's just very much Eddie's personality too.
Yeah. Well, you did wrestle on the SmackDown side of the Eddie tribute show. They taped both Raw and SmackDown on the same night, and you're on the SmackDown side of it. You beat Carlito after a counter into a twist of fate. And, I hosted DDP Snake Pit, and Dallas told me that he felt Eddie was like the master of the counter and that no one was better at it than him. And Michael Cole even brings that up on commentary that you win via a counter into the twist of fate and you pay a little homage. You're wearing an I'm Your Poppy shirt. Do you remember anything about that match and the emotions that came into that?
Um, yeah, I just remember it was one of those things where it's kind of like a tough day at the office when you're bereaving someone that you cared about so much. But I just remember that match, me and Carlito, that show was done the right way, where they just said go out and have solid matches. The baby faces win clean, whatever. Let's just try and put a smile on people's face because they need it. We need it. So I just remember just trying to do our part and do the best match that we could to honor Eddie's memory at that point.
Where do you feel Eddie Guerrero sits in the pantheon of professional wrestling today?
I mean, highly influential for being way ahead of the curve when it comes to modern wrestling style and entertaining wrestling. I mean, so he's a figure that is iconic, and he will always be tied to history and to the evolution of the change of the pro wrestling style.
And it's crazy because his run at the top is so short. He doesn't have a long run at the top. It's less than 2 years. And yet
Right.
people still revere him in the way that they do. I think that's a testament to just how incredible he was. And we got a lot of Ask Matt questions. I want to get to some of them with you here. Pat Pitts asks, if Eddie was around today, what brand would he be part of? What company fits his style the best?
I mean, I feel like Dean Malenko is tailor-made for AAW, so I feel like Eddie Guerrero would fall in that same category. I think he would be amazing here, like as a coach or producer. But I could see him contributing to any wrestling company. I mean, he's that amazing.
I bet you if Eddie were still around, he'd be a player coach. I think he would still be having matches every. If Sting is out there right now, you can't tell me that Eddie Guerrero wouldn't still have that bug to get every now and then get in there and wrestle.
Right.
I just think that would be innate to him. Could you see that being the case?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Richie asks, what, if any, was the biggest difference you saw working with Eddie during his first stint in WWE compared to his second?
I mean, just sobriety. I mean, he was dependable, during that first stint, much like I was, telling you the story about that Backlash triple threat match with myself and Jay and Eddie, just like we couldn't find him all throughout the day. He was just, there'd be times whenever his addiction would take control of the steering wheel, that he wouldn't be dependable. But when he came back, he was dependable to the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's obviously the biggest difference.
Tim says, huge fan of the show. Just finished binging it. Now caught up. Thank you very much for that, Tim. He says, thank you both for being awesome. Any fun stories spending time with Eddie after any shows?
Thank you, Tim. Here's a funny story, actually. There was one night where we were starting a WWE loop, and it was my flight was late, and I ended up taking a cab or whatever, not getting in a rental car and going straight to the venue. And we worked whatever house show it was, and I just needed to get to the next town. And I ended up jumping in with, of all people, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit. And I was like, cool, do you guys know where you're staying yet? And they said, no, we haven't booked yet or whatever. And I was like looking through my phone and said, oh, well, we have to fly out the next day in the afternoon, I think, to wherever we're going to. And I said, well, there's like this, there's a Hampton, there's a Fairfield, there's this Marriott right there by the airport or wherever. I said, no, we don't stay by the airport. We stay by a gym. We said, which Gold's Gym are we going to? And they're having this conversation with one another. I said, oh, okay. Well, I mean, whatever your hotel you go to, I'm fine. I'll book there. And they said, we're going to, whatever Gold's Gym. And the hotel that is closest to it, which is like right across the street, is here. This is where we're going to stay. Are you cool with that? And I was like, oh, of course I'm cool with that. You're giving me a ride. That's fine. They said, do you want to go work out in the morning? I said, oh, what time are you guys going? Because our flight's our flight's at 1, right? They said, we're going at 6 a.m. And I was like, I'll catch a quick one at the gym, guys. I'll just do some cardio or whatever. But that's how they were too. I mean, and we're driving and it's 1 o'clock in the morning or whatever. They would literally, Eddie and Chris would stay in hotels that were like right by the gym, and they would get up and that would be the first thing they would do and knock out, like regardless if they were sleeping 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours, they get up and go to the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning.
I think that was that chip on the shoulder. They were smaller guys. They knew they had to look the part and had to be what a pro wrestler embodied at that time. That's crazy. Wow. 6 a.m. after long drives. Boy. Valerie, who always has great questions for us here, says, how would you see Eddie Guerrero fitting into late 2000s, early 2010s TNA? And who do you think would be Eddie Guerrero's opponent if he had joined TNA? That's a great question.
That's interesting. An Eddie Guerrero versus AJ Styles match would have been crazy.
Got to be that, right?
Yeah. I mean, Eddie Guerrero versus Samoa Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Be hot. Eddie Guerrero, even at that time, like Christopher Daniels. There would have been a lot of interesting opponents for him there.
Yeah. Wrestling Study Podcast says, any memorable backstage fights of Eddie Guerrero? I know he and Kurt Angle had a backstage fight one day.
No, I don't remember witnessing any Eddie Guerrero fights in person for sure. I remember hearing him and Kurt joking about that fight afterward. It's funny because they got into a fight just over their passions, I think. But yeah, I mean, Eddie was one of those guys too. He was very stern in the things he believed, especially when he was out there. He was a super humble, super nice guy, but he was also very passionate and very stern in his beliefs. So I would imagine Eddie would be hard to handle if you're in a fight with him.
Joey Ibahara has a question about the little trios run you had. He goes, Team Extreme Heat, Latino-tude, or Heatitude?
Latino-tude. Maybe Team Extreme Heat. Team Extreme Heat.
All right. I like that. That's good. Let's see. I got a couple more for you here that I would love to see you answer. Scott says, want to say you and Jericho have both said Eddie was the best at reading a live crowd. How often would he change things up on the fly, and did it ever get him in trouble with Vince, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge. I bet it did. I bet there was some point where Vince had a specific laid out direction that he wanted this match to go, and like Eddie felt something different and probably didn't do it. I could definitely see him like, what the fuck was that, Guerrero? I could 100% see that happening at some point. But I don't know. I don't know personally of any experiences like that, but it's something I could see happening. And I feel like Eddie Guerrero, like he would change some shit up and cause something on the fly almost every match. I mean, because he was someone who didn't work because of, predetermined high spots. He was someone who like worked off the field of the crowd.
Colin asks, who in modern wrestling would you say resembles Eddie the closest, and why?
I don't know, maybe even like maybe a Bryan Danielson.
Interesting.
Would remind me a little bit of him. I feel like he is a great wrestler and technical wrestler, and that's kind of like what he's known for. But also, he'll do the deal where he runs and backflips, and he has these athletic moves he can do too. But I could also see Bryan being someone, if the crowd is going in a different direction, kind of changing it up too. I could kind of see that.
I think I've said this to you even on the show before, but I see the seeds of Eddie so much in Sammy Guevara. I see so much of the 96, 97 Eddie there. And if Sammy can continue to develop and put all those pieces together, I think he very much has a skill set that is comparable to Eddie in that sense. Sammy better than I do, obviously, but just from my observation.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then let's ask this last question here from Maliha. What part of his personality or memory do you still keep with you today?
I mean, I think, just he was very kind to everyone, super humble. And I mean, I would say those things were definitely things that I feel like rubbed off on people around him. So I was very happy to know him. I was happy to get to spend a lot of time with him, work with him, some in the ring and in public in front of people and whatnot. Also just that changing things on the fly if the crowd is not into what you're doing. I mean, that's probably the greatest thing I would say that I probably was influenced by him from. And that's something that I carry with me, and I definitely do.
And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention what an amazing career Vicky Guerrero had, piggybacking off of all the success that Eddie had. And
sure,
she could have just been a periphery character that was used in a couple storylines, but she embodied it and understood the assignment to a T and became one of the best all-time authority figure heels and managers, in my opinion. I really believe that Vicky is one of the best, and that's such a great way to carry on that legacy, isn't it?
Indeed, it really is.
You enjoy working with Vicky in AEW?
Yeah. Vicky's an absolute sweetheart too. Yeah, it's definitely great having her around.
I agree with you entirely on that. This has been a very fun episode, Matt, and I'm glad that we got to look back on a guy that so many people have so much admiration for and adoration for. Anything else you'd like to add on, Eddie, as we wrap up here?
No, it was great to, revisit these memories and talk about him. And he was truly one of a kind, a very special human being who had his battles and had his struggles. But when it came down to being a pro wrestler in its most pure form, Eddie defined all that. Eddie epitomized that. I mean, he was an entertainer. He was a storyteller. He was a wrestler. He was a flyer. He was a brawler. He could do everything. And that's talent. And that's extremely rare to find, someone who can do everything great. And Eddie Guerrero, he checked all those boxes.
I'm with you entirely, Matt. I think he's one of the greatest of all time, and I'm so glad we got to talk about his life and times here on the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy, which we do every single week. You head to extremehardy.com. You check us out on YouTube. You check us out on Apple, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And the most important thing is you leave that 5-star review for us, like this one from Hoppy Citrusy, who says this podcast is wonderful. Because I'm an outside salesman, have a lot of windshield time. Podcasts keep me sane, and I get so excited when I see the notification for a new episode of The Extreme Life. I might say it's an addiction. Thank you very much for that great review. Leave us your review. Send it to us at Matt Hardy Pod, at Matt Hardy Brand, at John Alba, and you'll be entered to win a t-shirt courtesy of the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy. We love doing these little giveaways. Let's start getting some of those again.
And I got to tell you guys, listening every single week to the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy with myself and John is the greatest addiction you could probably have. It's also half-ass healthy.
Half-ass healthy. Like how the gothic baby is half-ass over these days. This podcast is full on over. We appreciate you guys. We'll see you next week. We're talking about Survivor Series 2000. I think we might see the Conquistadors come back by chance and maybe get a little comeuppance on Edge and Christian. That's just what my gut says, Matt Hardy. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. The words have been spoken. We'll see you next week right here on the Extreme Life of Matt Hardy.
Adios.
My skin's dying because you're under it. I'm done lying to myself for this, for all the wonder and believing that it's making me weak. I'll fade away and classify myself as obsolete. My skin's dying. I'm done lying.
But I feel strongly that saving money is important. You know, if it's not something we worry about now, boy, we are really going to worry about it later. And I want to help you get out of debt faster and do it with cheaper monthly payments. I'm talking to you if you're in a 30-year loan. Now is the time to take years off of your loan. We're routinely helping our listeners cut 5, 10, even 15 years off their loan. And you can do this without perfect credit with no money out of pocket. You've just got to start at SaveWithConrad.com.